There are multiple different learning theories when it comes to education. During this presentation, we're going to explore just a few of them and how they can be applied into the elementary school classroom. Today we're going to be discussing Pavlov's classical conditioning, Skinner's operant conditioning, Bruner's theory of cognitive growth, and constructivism. We will be looking at an overview of them and also how to apply them into the classroom. Beginning with Pavlov's classical conditioning theory. Here is a quote from the text. To explain classical conditioning, you begin by initially presenting an unconditioned stimulus, which will then bring out an unconditioned response. When Pavlov did this, he presented a hungry dog with some meat powder, which is the unconditioned stimulus, and then that made the dog produce saliva, which is the unconditioned response. After that, you need to repeatedly present an initially neutral stimulus immediately before presenting the unconditioned stimulus. So to do this, every time that Pavlov introduced the stimulus, he had a metronome ticking. And then the dog did not salivate initially, but in time, as he repeated this, the dog did, meaning that the metronome became the conditioned stimulus and salivating happened because of that. So if we're thinking of how to do this in the classroom, obviously we're not going to ring a bell and make our students produce saliva. It's going to look different, but the idea behind it is the same. Whenever we're teaching our elementary students those call and response attention grabbers, some teachers like to use phrases, other teachers like to clap, but regardless, the main goal in hand is to get students to stop talking and give you their attention. So before conditioning, the teacher would say something like, class, class, and the students wouldn't quiet down. We as teachers know that saying class, class, we want the students to respond with yes, yes, and then to stop the talking and give you their undivided attention. During conditioning, whenever you're teaching the students this, the teacher would say class, class, and will instruct the students to respond with yes, yes, and also instruct them to quiet down after. After this is repeated and students are reminded initially, the teacher should be able to say class, class, and the students should automatically respond with yes, yes, and quiet down. Another example would be classroom cleanup. Whenever we are transitioning, sometimes there's games or things that need to be put away before we move into a new area of the day. So it's important to have the students know when to clean up and how to do it quickly and efficiently. Before conditioning, the teacher might count down from 20 and the students just think the teacher's counting. They don't know to clean up. During conditioning, the teacher would instruct the students to clean up and start to count down from 20. And after conditioning, after the teacher repeats this, the students will know that they need to clean up in that time and try to be done before 0. The next one is B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning theory. And here is another quote from the text talking about reinforcement, which is a really big part of this whole theory. So this is a visual that's really helpful. So within the operant conditioning theory, it's basically considering reinforcement or punishment to increase or decrease the likelihood of a behavior. So we're going to take a look at an example of each of these. We've got positive reinforcement, which is giving something to a student to increase that behavior. There's negative reinforcement, meaning taking something away from a student to increase the likelihood of a behavior. There's positive punishment, giving a student a consequence to decrease the behavior, or negative punishment, taking something away to decrease the likelihood of that behavior happening again. So for positive reinforcement, that's giving your students something to make it happen again. We oftentimes employ those token systems. If a student's doing something good, they receive a sticker, a ticket, a prize, something to show them that you appreciate what they're doing. And serious talking. And that will help them to reapply what they've been doing. You have positive punishment, which is giving the students a consequence to make sure that they don't repeat that behavior. So if a student is not behaving the way that you want them to, you can give them a consequence, which is where the positive comes in. You can give them a think lap at recess. So during recess time, they have to maybe walk the perimeter of the basketball court to think about how they could change their behavior for next time. You have a negative reinforcement, meaning taking something away to increase the likelihood of a behavior happening. So, for example, if a student has some type of a behavior system in place, maybe they've shown you that they are making good choices, you're going to remove whatever that barrier was. So, for example, if a student was having trouble at lunch, you might give them an assigned seat. If they've been doing a really good job and making those good choices at lunch, you want to kind of reward them. You can take away their assigned seat and let them sit wherever they want, in hopes that that reward will let them continue the behavior that they're doing. And finally, you have a negative punishment. A student might be using a technology device and doing something that's not approved at that time. If you find that that's happening, you can take away the device, and that works as a punishment because the student wants to be on that. So you're taking away something that they're using, and you are giving them a consequence by taking that away. The next one would be Bruner's theory of cognitive growth. So his theory talks about how we should be differentiating our instruction and how students learn differently depending on where they are at their growth period, and that might look different for students even if they're the same age. So one of the things described in the text is a spiral curriculum where concepts should initially be taught in a very simple, basic manner so that the children can understand them. And then as time passes and you revisit them, you can get more and more complex, which is the spiral curriculum. So for example, if you think of addition in math, in kindergarten, it's very basic. You revisit that multiple times throughout kindergarten. You revisit it in first grade, the numbers get a little bit bigger. Go to it in second grade, now you're working with two-digit numbers. Third grade, you're working with hundreds and thousands. Fourth grade, you're working with 10,000s, you're getting with decimals. So you're still teaching that basic addition, but it's getting more and more complex. You're coming back to it and repeating it, and it's getting more deep each time. Another one would be flexible grouping, where teachers can take students' current levels into consideration and teaching with small groups. So these are your guided reading groups, math groups. You're employing that tiered instruction. You're allowing for more challenging concepts to your above grade level learners, but you're giving more support to those below grade level learners. And finally, the last one is constructivism, which really isn't a theory at all. It's more so just the idea that learners need to be in an environment where they can kind of take charge of their own learning and go through that discovery, and it's not so teacher-centered. So ways that you can apply this to the classroom would be create that student-centered classroom. Be a guide to the students in discovering. Don't take over. Let them discover, and you just lead them along the way. Allow for flexibility in learning opportunities, and encourage exploration and encourage students to reflect on what they've learned.